Everything that Great Britain produced and France produced and Germany produced together, and it was less than what the United States could produce. 35% of all the manufactured goods produced in the world were being produced in the United States by 1900.
America's booming industrial economy demanded wood, minerals, animals, and other natural resources, all of which could be found in abundance in the vast lands lying west of the Mississippi.
We had the building of this, what I call an industrial heartland, the movement westward of industry. 1875, most factories were along the eastern seaboard and eastern seaboard cities. And then over the next 25 years, we have the spread of industry through the Middle Atlantic states into the Midwest.
To encourage Western settlement and development, Congress passed a series of laws giving away millions of acres of land for a small filing fee and the pledge that it be made productive. Drawn by promises of free land and hopes for a better life, some 10 million people headed west in the decades following the end of the Civil War.
By and by, I was smitten with the silver fever. Prospecting parties were leaving for the mountains every day and discovering and taking possession of rich silver-bearing lodes and ledges of quartz. Plainly, this was the road to fortune. But they were rough in those times. They fairly reveled in gold, whiskey, fights, and fandangos, and were unspeakably happy. Mark Twain.
These were the golden days of the Wild West, of adventurous men and women who sought their fortunes on the western mining frontier, of grub-stake prospectors striking it rich, hard rock miners buried in cave-ins deep within the earth, and shrewd vendors who built makeshift food stands into lavish restaurants and saloons. The silver and gold dug from the earth provided industrialists with money to finance their activities. The coal fueled their engines. The iron, copper, and lead was transformed into machine parts and consumer goods that poured out of American factories and mills. Before long, independent prospectors gave way to large mining companies. Specially trained engineers oversaw the difficult task of extraction, often performed by Mexican, Chinese, and European immigrants. Americans were voracious consumers of wood, especially the railroads and mining companies, which used more than 1/4 of the nation's annual timber supply. Lumber companies chopped and sawed their way across the nation, sweeping from Florida to East Texas and felling the great northern forests of the Midwest, then cutting their way through the Rockies to the temperate rainforests of the West Coast. West of the 98th meridian, much of America was too dry to support agriculture. At the end of the Civil War, close to 5 million longhorn steer roamed the vast Texas grasslands. To turn these wild cattle into cash, Texas ranchers in 1866 began to drive great herds 1,000 miles north to stops along the new rail lines, where the steer could be loaded onto trains for eastern markets. The cattle frontier became a land of opportunity for the rugged men called cowboys who tended the herds, ex-Confederate soldiers, Southern blacks, and Mexican vaqueros who spent their money in the rough and tumble cow towns of Dodge City, Cheyenne, and Abilene.
A good-sized steer, when it is fit for the butcher market, will bring from $45 to $60. The same animal at its birth was worth but $5. He has run on the plains and cropped the grass from the public domain, and with scarcely any expense to its owner is worth $40 more than when he started on his pilgrimage.
Americans' insatiable hunger for beef promised huge profits to Eastern and European investors who poured money into Western beef. Cattle ranchers battled Indians, Mexicanos, sheep herders, and farmers in range wars for control of millions of acres of public and private domain. At the end of the Civil War, 11 million buffalo still roamed the Great Western Plains. Within 20 years, they had all but disappeared. From the southern tip of Texas north into Canada, cattle had become king. But the free-ranging cattle quickly overgrazed the prairies. And when the weather turned mean in the 1880s, droughts and blizzards decimated the herds, killing millions. By the early 1890s, the great cattle drives were all but over. The invention and mass production of barbed wire enabled ranchers to enclose huge areas for their herds, which they drove to stockyards along the new northern and southern rail lines.
In the summer of 1871, Mother got hold of some literature sent out by the railroad telling of the glories of Nebraska and how there were homesteads to be taken within 4 miles of the state capital and the university. She was greatly enthused and urged Father, as we say now, to get in on the ground floor.
Between 1860 and 1900, Western farmers put more acres under the plow than had been cultivated in the previous 250 years of American history. The same magic wands of government land acts, transportation, and technology that had developed Western resources into lucrative industries turned the wind-swept Great Plains and the fertile soil of the far West into the breadbasket of the world. Offering 160-acre plots to almost anyone who promised to cultivate the land for 5 years, the Federal Homestead Act of 1862 set off the Great Western Migration. Drawn from their homelands by promotional brochures that boasted opportunities in the American West, 2 million European immigrants settled on the Great Plains, transplanting pieces of Sweden to Minnesota, Germany and Denmark to Kansas, and Poland to Nebraska. The arrival of the Santa Fe Railroad to Los Angeles in 1885 set off a land boom in Southern California. Within a decade, California had become a major grower of fruits and vegetables, cultivated by the Chinese, Japanese, and Mexican immigrants that the large growers hired to work the fields. New farm implements like the chilled iron plow, spring-tooth harrow, and mechanical harvester enabled farmers to produce 5 to 10 times more than before. In the arid West, farmers used new varieties of seeds and dry soil farming techniques to turn dry prairie into waving fields of wheat. The challenges of the West also offered women opportunities not available back east. They ran boarding houses and restaurants, operated businesses, ran their own farms, and entered the professions. The West had more female doctors than any section of the country. The West was also the first region to give women the right to vote. The Utah and Wyoming territories began the trend in 1870, followed later by Colorado and Idaho. In the years between 1866 and 1880, Western farmers put 23 million new acres under the plow. But as wheat, corn, and other grains flooded the market, prices plunged. Thousands of farmers couldn't pay their bills and lost their land.
Hurrah for Greer County, the land of the free, the land of the bedbug, grasshopper, and flea. I'll sing of its praises, I'll tell of its fame, while starving to death on my government claim.
By 1900, 2/3 of the homestead farms had failed. As homesteaders went bust, big growers backed by Eastern and European investors bought up the failing farms and established huge agricultural operations called bonanza farms. One of the first was Oliver Dalrymple, who strung together 30,000 acres into a vast commercial enterprise. Using the latest mechanized farm implements, large commercial farmers created factories in the field.
The Bonanza Farm represents the Army system applied to agriculture. A manager marshals his men, arrays his instruments of war, and with mechanical precision, the whole force moves forward to conquer and extract rich tribute from the land.
The development of commercial agriculture and the means to ship the food produced enabled Americans to eat better and more cheaply than ever before. Refrigerated boxcars shipped meats, grains, and vegetables to grocery stores and dinner tables across the country. From the far western lands came grapes, oranges, broccoli, and almonds. The Great Plains offered endless fields of wheat and corn. while the South contributed rice, tobacco, and peanuts. But even as Western farms transformed American diets, the rise of big commercial growers began to eclipse Jefferson's dream of a nation of self-sufficient family farmers.
As agricultural opportunities collapsed in the countryside, as prices declined in farm goods, more and more people moved off the farms and came into the cities looking for jobs.
In a new country, the rapid growth of cities is both natural and necessary, for no efficient industrial organization of a new settlement is possible without industrial centers to carry on the necessary work of assembling and distributing goods.
When Adna Weber explained the rise of American cities to the readers of Scribner's in 1899, the United States was in the midst of a great wave of city building. Whereas only 16 cities had more than 60,000 people in 1860, 11 cities now boasted more than 250,000. Chicago's population had doubled every decade, topping more than 1 million by 1890. Before the Civil War, manufacturing centered in the nation's countryside, along the streams and rivers whose water powered most industrial machinery. Steam engines and electricity freed manufacturers from having to reside near water power. So industry moved to cities, where energy, labor, consumers, and transportation were all close at hand.
The huge businesses, whether they are steel plants or agricultural machine plants, eventually car factories, had to be located in areas where there were populations of people and where there could be increased populations of people. And that's why you see these mass production plants siting themselves in existing cities.
By the dawn of the 20th century, more than 90% of all American production took place in cities. The largest cities were found in the Northeast and Midwest, where industrialization was the fastest. But cities were also growing in the South and West, serving as processing centers for regional industries. Minneapolis specialized in fur, Pittsburgh in coal and iron, Seattle in fish and timber. In the same way that national railroads sparked westward settlement, new innovations in mass transit enabled cities to expand into the adjacent countryside. While poorer families still clustered close to their workplaces, electrified streetcars took managers and other professionals to new residential neighborhoods on the outskirts of town.
As new immigrants came into the cities, you began to see a kind of segregation between the wealthier people in the cities who had their own sections of the city